She was humiliated and forced out of her seat, but just minutes later, the same flight attendant who shamed her was facing consequences no one could have predicted. What happened during this flight would change everything, not just for the people on board, but for the entire airline. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. Ava Carter stepped onto the airplane with a calm confidence that turned a few heads. She wore a tailored blazer over a sleek dress, her natural curls framing her face. In one hand, she held a leather laptop bag, and in the other, her boarding pass. She made her way down the aisle, glancing at the seat numbers as she passed. Ava's demeanor was calm and composed, but there was a quiet determination in her eyes that hinted she was someone who wasn't easily rattled. As she reached her assigned seat in the first-class section, she smiled politely at the passenger next to her and placed her bag in the overhead compartment. She sat down, pulling out a small notebook and pen, and started jotting down a few notes. Her focus was entirely on her task, oblivious to the curious glances she occasionally received from others around her. Moments later, Miranda Scott, one of the flight attendants, walked briskly through the cabin. Miranda, in her crisp uniform, had a sharp gaze that seemed to inspect every passenger she passed. Her eyes landed on Ava, and she paused. Something about Ava caught her attention, though it wasn't immediately clear what. Miranda's expression tightened, and she walked closer, stopping just beside Ava's seat. "Excuse me," Miranda said in a tone that was polite, but carried an edge. "Can I see your boarding pass, please?" Ava looked up, surprised but unfazed. She handed over her boarding pass with a small smile. "Of course." Miranda scanned the ticket and frowned slightly. "This is for first class." "Yes," Ava said simply, her voice steady. "That's correct." Miranda's frown deepened as if she were trying to reconcile something in her mind. After a brief pause, she handed the boarding pass back without another word. Her lips pressed into a tight line as she walked away, but her demeanor suggested she wasn't done yet. Ava, meanwhile, shrugged off the interaction. She returned to her notes, her pen moving steadily across the paper. She didn't notice Miranda speaking quietly with another flight attendant near the galley, casting glances back in her direction. The tension in Miranda's face was clear, even from afar. It wasn't long before Miranda returned, this time with a more authoritative air. "Miss Carter, could you step aside for a moment? I need to verify something." Ava blinked, surprised but calm. She stood, taking her laptop bag with her, and followed Miranda toward the galley. Passengers in first class exchanged curious looks, whispering among themselves. Ava's poise remained intact as she stood in the narrow space waiting for Miranda to speak. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to a different seat," Miranda said, folding her arms. "It seems there may have been a mistake with your booking." Ava tilted her head slightly, her brow furrowing. "A mistake? I don't think so. I booked this ticket weeks ago, and it was confirmed. Could you double-check?" Miranda's tone turned colder. "I already checked. I don't think this seat is appropriate for you. I'll have to ask you to take a seat in the main cabin." The words hung in the air, and for the first time Ava's expression shifted. A flicker of something, disbelief, annoyance, crossed her face, but she quickly regained her composure. "I don't understand. My ticket is valid. Why would I need to move?" Miranda stiffened, her voice dropping to a harsher whisper. "I don't have time to explain. Either you move or I'll have to call security to assist." Ava's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded once, quietly returning to her seat to gather her belongings. The entire cabin seemed to be watching now, the murmurs growing louder. As Ava walked toward the back of the plane, escorted by Miranda, she could feel the stares of other passengers following her. She kept her head high, but her grip on her laptop bag tightened ever so slightly. When they reached the main cabin, Miranda gestured toward an empty seat in the middle row. Ava placed her bag under the seat and sat down without a word. Miranda walked away, leaving Ava to settle into her new, cramped spot. Ava looked out the window, her face calm, but her thoughts were clearly racing. Somewhere between frustration and disbelief,